Welcome back to Miles Reads. I'm Miles. Today, we're going to talk about a book called Why We Work. At first glance, the title might seem to pose a question with an obvious answer. But believe me, Why We Work is a book that will challenge everything you thought you knew. It explores topics touching on human nature, the essence of capitalism, and some of the most widely applied theories in sociology. Whether you're an employer or an employee, once you understand the fundamental question of why we work, you will know how to make the jobs you offer more appealing, and how to find a greater sense of accomplishment in the work you do. The author, Barry Schwartz, is a professor of psychology at Swarthmore College and has long studied social behavior and psychology. Hailed as one of the most influential psychologists in the West, he has published 10 books and hundreds of academic papers. His work, The Paradox of Choice, was named one of the top 10 business books of the year by Businessweek and Forbes. Upon its release, Why We Work was highly recommended by figures like Laszlo Bock, the former senior vice president of people operations at Google, and best-selling business author Daniel Pink. So what is this book really about? It will tell us, why do the vast majority of people find their work monotonous, boring, and a waste of life, rarely experiencing a sense of satisfaction? Why do modern corporations often dislike employees who work with a sense of mission? Why do the incentive systems in companies end up diminishing employee motivation? Only by understanding the deep-seated reasons behind work can we design better work environments, motivate our teams more effectively, and ultimately help ourselves find meaning in our work and land a truly good job. All right, let's start from the beginning. How did work become so awful? Do you know anyone who is truly satisfied with their job? If you do, there probably aren't many. Gallup, the global analytics and advisory firm, has been tracking the state of the global workplace since the 1990s. After more than 2 decades of research covering 25 million employees in 189 countries, the results showed only 13% of employees are actively engaged and enthusiastic. 63% are disengaged, just going through the motions. The remaining 24% are even worse, they are actively disengaged, harboring a deep dislike for their work. Does anyone in the world actually feel satisfied with their job? Perhaps they exist at the very top of that 13% pyramid. They treat their work as a calling, approaching it like a crossword puzzle. It's challenging, yet they feel confident, honing their skills through practice and ultimately achieving an extraordinary sense of accomplishment. But the reason most of us hate our jobs is precisely because our work is rigid, mechanical, and offers no room for creativity. Sometimes it even pushes our psychological and ethical boundaries. So we are right to hate our work. It's the work itself that needs re-examining. This is precisely Professor Schwartz's point. That being the case, let's trace this back to its roots. When did work start to become so unpleasant? Shouldn't everyone derive the joy of creation from their work? Our search for the origin leads us to Adam Smith, the father of economics, who used the invisible hand as a metaphor for the market economy. In his masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations, he wrote that if a man is paid the same for performing a difficult task as he is for doing nothing, he will perform it carelessly, as laziness and the love of ease are natural to man. Based on this theory of human nature, Adam Smith advocated for breaking down work processes into simple, repetitive steps. He described a pin factory. One worker draws out the wire, another straightens it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, a fifth grinds the top. With 10 workers collaborating, they could produce 48,000 pins a day. If they worked alone, one person couldn't even make 20. Everyone repeats, and repeats, just like Charlie Chaplin in modern times. While the process was undoubtedly dull, efficiency soared. At the time, someone asked Adam Smith, what kind of person would be willing to do such simple, repetitive work day in and day out in the factory you describe? He replied, people certainly don't enjoy the work, but they wouldn't want to go elsewhere either. The implication was, people are lazy by nature. It doesn't matter where they work or what they do, they'd rather be doing nothing. Only one thing can get them onto the assembly line: a wage. In truth, Adam Smith's understanding of human nature wasn't so simplistic. He detailed his more complex thoughts in another book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. But later theorists and practitioners weren't interested. Instead, They amplified the narrative that humans are inherently lazy and that compensation is all that matters. More than 200 years later, Adam Smith's design has permeated every industry. Whether in manufacturing, education, or culture, we have started to segment processes, quantify work, and calculate inputs and outputs. As a result, everyone trudges to work with heavy steps, unable to find any reason to be there beyond a paycheck. And it all began with a single assumption Adam Smith made about human nature and motivation. 2. Working with a sense of purpose, something employers often don't allow. What's so bad about this assumption? The assumption that people are lazy and only motivated by pay is suboptimal for both employees and companies. First, let's look at its impact on employees. Researchers interviewed workers from various industries. Let's take the example of Luke, a hospital janitor. One day, a patient's father yelled at Luke, accusing him of not cleaning his son's room. In fact, Luke had just cleaned it while the father was out. Luke was about to argue but stopped himself. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry. I'll go clean it right now." Why didn't he defend himself? He later told the interviewer that he instantly understood the father's frustration. His son had been hospitalized for 6 months, and the man was at his wit's end. Thinking of this, Luke's anger vanished, and he cleaned the room again in front of the father. Consider Luke's colleagues. One custodian was mopping the lobby when he saw a patient who had just undergone major surgery practicing walking up and down the stairs. He immediately stopped what he was doing, worried the freshly mopped floor would be too slippery. Another colleague changed the artwork in the patient's rooms every week and would even dance and tell jokes to cheer them up. Looking at these janitors, let's analyze what employees want from their work and how management views such behavior. The hospital's job description for a janitor is standardized. Clean rooms, sanitize equipment, empty bedpans, change beds and light bulbs, mop floors, the list goes on. But nowhere does it say care for and comfort patients and their families. Yet Luke and his colleagues would rejoice when a patient's condition improved, find ways to distract them from their pain and fear, and listen and offer comfort when needed. These janitors didn't rigidly stick to their job descriptions. They spontaneously redefined their work, internalizing the hospital's mission of saving lives and easing suffering into their own understanding of their jobs. Is it because working in a hospital naturally cultivates a higher moral character? It's not that simple. Researchers have studied numerous industries, especially those considered to involve repetitive labor with little room for creativity, such as factory workers, janitors, and hairdressers. They found that even in these fields, there are individuals who find meaning in their work rather than simply working for a paycheck. This shows that people have a natural inclination to find purpose in their work. When a job is seen as a calling, it is no longer just a livelihood but a source of accomplishment, pride, and mission. However, this is all contingent on whether the job itself provides enough freedom for them to exercise these qualities. If the hospital director were a disciple of Adam Smith, he would surely see Luke as inefficient for doing tasks outside his job description. Moreover, people like Luke are hard to control. Managers can't effectively manage them. Any reasonable person knows that employees like Luke are an asset to the hospital. But in the pursuit of efficiency and control, managers often suppress such non-compliant individuals. Therefore, Professor Schwartz says the statement, "You can't get good employees anymore," isn't entirely accurate. It should be, "You can't get good employees anymore when the work you offer is tedious and monotonous." And this is precisely the predicament that most of us enthusiastic and driven employees face. 3. Are material incentives effective? Having discussed employees, let's see how Adam Smith's assumption misleads companies. The core of modern business management is compensation management, rewarding those who meet targets and penalizing those who don't. According to Smith's assumption, all employees want is money, so rewards and punishments revolve around pay. In Smith's own words, the only way to get people to do their work well, to be excellent, to be on the right side of the moral question, is to pay them well for it. From a company's perspective, this sounds perfectly logical. Even if we don't agree it's the only way, we might think it's a good way. But this seemingly rational logic is, in fact, wrong. Material incentives don't just fail to strengthen the motivation to do good work, they can actually weaken it. Sociologist Bruno Frey calls this motivation crowding out. Why is that? Let's look at a few examples. An Israeli daycare center was having a problem with parents arriving late to pick up their children, which meant the center couldn't close on time. Finally, the management introduced a policy, a fine for late pickups. To the daycare's surprise, the new rule resulted in more parents arriving late. What was the reason? Simply put, the parents started treating the fine as a price. A fine is a penalty for a violation. A price is what you pay for a service. The daycare's intention was to punish, but parents saw the fine as a fee for extended care services. Before the fine, parents viewed being late as morally wrong. After the fine was implemented, the moral dimension disappeared, replaced by a purely economic calculation. They figured the fine was a good deal and started arriving late with a clear conscience. In this case, the economic motive didn't strengthen the moral motive, it crowded it out. Consider another experiment. Researchers on the street asked passersby if they would help move a sofa into a van. Some were offered payment while others were not. The results showed that the subjects adopted two different mindsets. Without payment, people saw it as a social act helping someone out, and most were willing. With payment, it became an economic transaction. People started to weigh whether the payment was worth their time and effort. If they felt the compensation was too low, they wouldn't help. In the end, most of the subjects who were offered money were less willing to help. Once again, social motivation and economic motivation weakened each other. Therefore, for companies, incentive systems can sometimes be dangerous. Instead of locking people into assembly lines and designing complex systems of rewards and punishments, it would be better to design a company that gives employees more autonomy, variety, and room for growth, allowing them to feel pride and a sense of accomplishment in their work. Because no incentive system can ever replace the intrinsic motivation of doing something simply because it is the right thing to do. 4. How false ideas change reality. The self-fulfilling prophecy. We've said that people's dissatisfaction with work stems from Adam Smith's simplistic assumption about human nature. This assumption isn't the best path forward, so why have entrepreneurs and employees alike believed in it for centuries? This is where the peculiar nature of social theory comes in. The laws of natural science operate the same way regardless of how humans discover or define them. But social theory is different. Once an idea is created, whether right or wrong, it profoundly influences people's behavior, causing that behavior to evolve in line with the idea's logic, ultimately making the theory itself more entrenched. Sociologists call this phenomenon a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a classic experiment from the field of education. Researchers randomly designated some students in an elementary school classroom and then told the teacher that these children were intellectually gifted and highly likely to achieve outstanding academic success in the future. This was, of course, a fabrication. But because the judgment came from experts, the teachers, consciously or unconsciously, changed their attitudes toward these students. By the end of the term, the students who had been designated had indeed become top performers. Here's another example. There was once a view that black workers were not suited for union membership because they had a lower standard of living, were willing to take any low-paying job, and were traitors to the working class. As a result, when unions went on strike, it was precisely because black workers were not union members that they became the ones to fill the labor shortages in factories. On the surface, the prophecy that black workers are not suited for unions came true. But a closer look reveals that it was the power of the idea that inverted cause and effect, allowing the prophecy to fulfill itself. This clearly illustrates how ideas shape behavior. As long as people are willing to believe it, even a false theory can become reality. In fact, Adam Smith understood this principle long ago. Look at his own words. The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations has no occasion to exert his understanding he naturally loses. Therefore, the habit of such exertion, and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Isn't he describing a self-fulfilling prophecy? Returning to our topic, can you say that human nature is simply to seek comfort and demand only monetary rewards? Wrong. So-called human nature is, to a large extent, an invention, not a discovery. It was the Adam Smiths of the world who invented human nature in this way. Human nature needs to be redefined. There's a story about a scorpion that wants to cross a river and asks a frog to carry it. The frog says, "No, you'll sting me." The scorpion replies, "I won't. If I sting you, we'll both drown." The frog sees the logic and agrees. But halfway across the river, the frog feels a sharp pain in its back and cries out, "Why did you sting me?" The scorpion answers helplessly, "I couldn't help it. It's my nature." With that, they both sink to the bottom of the river. This is our old understanding of human nature, fixed and unchanging, like the scorpion's instinct. But humans are not scorpions. Our nature is far more complex. As mentioned earlier, human nature is largely a product of our own design. If we design work environments that reflect human value, we can cultivate people who value their work, not just their paychecks. If we design work environments where employees can find meaning, we can cultivate people who care about the meaning of their work. The Industrial Revolution lifted humanity out of poverty and vastly improved our material lives, one of the greatest achievements of civilization. But while it alleviated material poverty, it brought about spiritual poverty. The author tells us that perhaps this was a necessary price to pay in the early stages of economic development. But today, it is inexcusable to continue sacrificing spiritual enrichment for material abundance. Every one of us should strive to create a human nature worth pursuing. Fortunately, many companies have already realized this, such as Toyota and Google. Management expert Jeffrey Pfeffer has long studied how companies achieve sustained profit growth. He found that what makes a good company and what makes a good job are essentially the same. Highly effective companies typically share the following traits. 1. Provide comprehensive job security. 2. Empower self-managed teams, decentralize decision-making, and give employees a high degree of autonomy. 3. Offer above-average industry compensation but do not rely on individual incentives. When the company is profitable, all employees share in the profits. 4. Have a robust training system. 5. Evaluate employee performance but not excessively. 6. Integrate the company's goals and vision into every aspect of its practices. If you are an employer, strive to build your company this way. If you are an employee, strive to join a company like this. And that covers the key points of why we work. Let's recap. First, we traced the origin of hateful work to the theoretical assumption of the father of economics, Adam Smith, that human nature is lazy and driven only by pay. This assumption led to assembly line production, making work repetitive and mechanical, and minimizing individual meaning. Next, we discussed how this assumption is misleading for both employees and companies. For employees, it stifles passion and creativity. For companies, it leads to a one-dimensional management style reliant on monetary rewards and punishments, which can actually weaken employees' intrinsic motivation. Then, we explored why Adam Smith's assumption became so deeply ingrained. It shaped our beliefs and reality through the sociological phenomenon of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Finally, we see that, fortunately, change is already happening. We can redefine human nature, redesign work, and strive to be good employees or good employers. Alright, that's all for this book. Congratulations on finishing another one.